Hey, what's going on everybody? My name is Joey and welcome back to another video here on my channel. Today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. Usually I do build guides, things like that on my channel. I did a Plague Star guide recently which has been getting a lot of feedback, which has been awesome. But what I wanted to do today was I actually decided I was going to rank the elemental damage types in the game. I feel like this will be a good thing to do for my viewership so you guys can get a good idea of why I build my elements and my weapons the way I do, and why I see certain elements being good in certain scenarios, why certain elements are always good, this, that, and the third. So you can see here we have all of our elements here, and we have our list here. So we have 5 different tiers on here. The bottom tier is the Just Why/CO fodder category. This is legit just, why would you use these or they're just for CO. We have category here where the scenarios fit the elemental mod, or the physical damage mod. It will be there as well for that. We have really good. Obviously, these are just going to be really good elements that you have the opportunity to use in certain scenarios of the game. Upper echelon is going to be the kind of elements that are good in 90% of scenarios you go into in the game. And then we are going to have the top cheddar category. This top cheddar category is going to be the best of the best. The status effects that, in my opinion, are the best in the game, useful in every scenario, just pretty much untouchable, in my opinion. So let's just get into this now. So first things first, I want to start out with the bottom. We're going to start here with puncture and radiation. Now, we're putting these two into the bottom category here because they're just not very useful. Radiation, as we know, after the elemental balance changes, it no longer gives the 75% bonus damage against alloy armor. So that is something that's really knocked it off its pedestal. Really all it's good for now is if there's a certain faction that it is strong against, you have the opportunity to use it, but meanwhile other status effects most likely are better in that scenario anyway. And then also it will make enemies attack one another, distract them, yada yada. Puncture is also not very good on its own as well. What puncture does is they basically just deal less damage the more stacks they have on them of puncture. I believe it will deal up to 80% less damage at max stacks, which is like, you think it sounds interesting, but realistically it's like you don't want to build your gun to deal a damage type to make the enemies deal less damage to you, and you could just build your frame to ignore the damage entirely or tank the damage itself. Plus, it's not really great against any target factions in the game whatsoever, so I would definitely say that these two belong at the bottom in Just Why/CO's fodder. Now moving up into hazard scenarios. Now I'm only going to be putting one element into this, and that's going to be impact. Now impact actually has its uses. It's definitely, in my opinion, better than puncture because it will actually do something for you, as when you apply impact, it will give enemies mercy kill thresholds. So there's enemies in the game that are attenuated, like Dedicants, that are very annoying to kill, but are able to be mercy killed. So things like impact are really, really good to use against them, so you can kill them at upwards of 3/4 of their HP instantly instead of having to wait for them to get all the way down to 0 and kill them. So this is definitely something that has its uses. Not something I would say is like overall like fantastic, but in scenarios where you want to get mercy kills, impact is your go-to. It's very, very easy to get mercy kill thresholds open on enemies with this. You only need a few stacks of this, and they have a very, very large mercy kill threshold. So yeah, like I said, if you guys are going up against like Dedicants, things like that, I would definitely say you bring something with impact. Now we're going to move on into the really good category. Now, in the really good category, the first one I want to put here is actually going to be Toxin. Now, I'm putting Toxin here because I don't think Toxin is a bad element, but I also don't think Toxin is one of the better single elements. It's obviously bis against things like Corpus, because you'll go right through their shields. Tech Rot, you're going to go right through their shields. So in those regards, you have to say that it is good, because it has like a really, really strong use in the game. But when you're putting it up against things like armor and you're not really giving it any help from other elements or like external sources, it's not going to do as much as you would like it to, whereas like something like electric or heat will do a lot more in that scenario. Now, I don't think this is the worst single element. I actually think that cold is the worst single element in the game, though I still think it is good. It will increase your critical damage with each stack of cold you put on the enemies, and also it is extremely, extremely useful for freezing demos in place, freezing Thrax in place when you're trying to land headshots with a lot of the builds that I make. 90% of my primers have this as the single element to make sure I can freeze enemies in place. It's very, very useful. You'll see a lot of corrosive cold builds because they'll be going flat damage crit with corrosive, and then they'll bring cold on alongside so that they can get the extra critical damage from cold, which is always going to be nice for them. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about that here, but Toxin also has uses, like there's things like Primary Blight, which is very, very good. It gives CD and multi-shot to a ton of primary weapons that it's really, really good on. Like I said, also, it's very good against Tech Rot and Corpus, things that have raw HP. It's going to go right through them. It's really, really solid. So definitely Toxin deserves to be, for me, at the top of really good. And then we have cold on here. Cold is going to be at the bottom of really good, just because I feel that its use is more so intertwined with critical based weaponry or just freezing a target in place, whereas Toxin and Slash are damage types that you can bring into the mission and actually use to kill the enemies with, where cold is more of like a utility status in my eyes. So what I have in between Toxin and Cold here is I have Slash. Now, if this was pre-armor changes, pre-elemental balancing, Slash would be right here. But now with all the changes, Slash is down here in the center for me. The reason it's down here in the center for me is because Slash did not get any increase in damage ticking. It has had the same damage ticks that it had before. The big thing about Slash is it ignores 100% of enemy armor. So before, when enemies had a ton more armor and less HP, this was really good because it would ignore the armor and it would kill the enemies faster. But now enemies have more HP and less armor, so it's less desirable because it's easier to get through armor with things like corrosive, and even like green shards can get through them really fast. And then also they have more HP, so it's going to need to tick for longer, so you might even need things like status duration on builds that worked before. So this is definitely still a really good status, definitely not a weak one whatsoever. Weapons that come innate slash damage that you fully build for slash damage, you go heavy slash weighting, something like that, those weapons are still incredible. I have a bunch of builds on my channel that talk about slash heavy weapons that are really, really solid. But as far as things like hunter munitions go, this status effect definitely has taken a fall from grace, at least in my opinion. Now, I think this is all I'm really going to keep here for the really good category. Now, you can see we have about 8 elements left. And the thing is a lot of elements in this game are very good. So what I'm going to do first here is the first one I'm going to put into upper echelon is going to be electric damage. Now, electric damage is, in my opinion, now you can see the second best single element in the game. It does not stack like heat. It stacks the same way as Toxin. It is separate instances of damage as you stack the electric up on the weapon. It does not combine into a single instance. We'll be talking about that in a little bit. So you still will be doing a ton of dot tick damage, but the only reason I put this up here above electric or above Toxin is because electric has innate AoE damage. It has an innate AoE radius, so you can get more out of it in the same exact scenario that you can get in Toxin, except Toxin obviously will kill enemies with shields faster than electric will. But that doesn't mean that electric is worse. Electric is actually better, in my opinion, because there's more scenarios in which I would be bringing flat electric than I would be bringing flat toxin, in my opinion. Things like disruption, I would definitely be seeing myself using like flat electric over flat toxin, unless I'm using something like the Sporothrix maybe, or something I desperately need primary blight on. But yeah, for the most part, I think electric is definitely the better status effect. Single target wise, AoE wise, it does a lot. It's very, very good. Definitely not the best status effect in the game, but I definitely would put it up there as a top status effect. Now, for the second status effect, I'm going to be putting into upper echelon. This is going to be gas. Now, I'm putting gas in here because gas is very, very strong. It's a favorite of melee influence builds alongside Blast, as you know, most of you probably know if you make a lot of melee influence builds. It's definitely an element that I really like. Using something like Lavos to increase the damage of it is also very, very nice. Gas is a 3-meter innate cloud that can also headshot on its own, though the headshot does not have an increased multiplier, which is kind of silly. Though, if you do use something like Deadhead or Valiant's Formation, you can increase the damage of the gas ticks that way, or faction damage mods, status damage mods, that way too. They all work. So it's very, very nice to have that. It's also something, like I said, you use with influence, so you know you'll spread your electric, but then you're also going to get the 3-meter innate gas clouds all over the place. You know, they're going to retick for damage as you stack them up. They're going to do a ton. They're going to be free AoE. And the thing I like about gas is that gas isn't. It's not Blast, whereas Blast, I feel it needs to be more instantaneous. Like, you need a large group of enemies to explode near each other so they can reproc the explosion and sort of chain. But gas, it's like if you're killing a single target, you proc the gas cloud. The gas cloud will continuously tick them, whereas the blast is only going to do 30% of your base weapon damage per stack, up to 300% at max stacks. So, you know, it's definitely better, in my opinion, if you're dealing with like smaller clusters, to go with gas. But it's definitely not better than blast overall in the grand scheme of things. But definitely a very solid status effect. Now, the next status effect I am going to be putting in the upper echelon is going to be Magnetic. Now, Magnetic has gotten a serious glow up with the elemental balance changes. It now will proc a severe electric proc after you break Overguard off enemies. It has increased damage against Overguard, which there's so many enemies in the game that have Overguard now that just makes Magnetic so easy to use. We have a 60% mod already combined for it, which makes it even better for melee, primary, and secondary, so the usability is even more. Only one mod slot on your weapon, you can get this. You could put this on like your Pro-gen bonus for like your Galaxians or your Tenet weapons, your whatever you may have, your Kuva weapons. No, and it also, so when it breaks overguards or breaks shields, it'll force a electric status effect. This electric status effect is extremely powerful. It will do a ton of damage. You know, the stronger the enemy is, the more electric damage it's going to deal, which is very, very nice. So electric and magnetic deserve to be in the same category, in my opinion, as I think, honestly, magnetic may be better than electric. Solely because it does something else along with applying electric, but I think electric on its own is very, very nice. I would definitely use, if I was going to say solo element build and I was going up against anything in the game, I would take electric over magnetic, but magnetic is useful in so many scenarios, and it's so, so good, and it's still going to give you electric procs. So now rounding it out to the next element I have in here for you guys. The next element I'm going to have for you guys in the upper echelon category, surprisingly, is actually going to be void damage. Now, this isn't Xata's in specific, because a lot of people think that Xata's void damage works the same way as regular void damage. It does, but it doesn't. The void damage that your weapon will deal with Xata's, specifically Xata's Whisper, the ability, will give you a percentage of the weapon's damage dealt as another instance. But if you're just using your operator, or you're just proccing void damage that way, it's not going to do the extra instances. It's not going to do the extra percent of your weapon damage. If you shoot an enemy with your operator and you get the bubble, like, you're not getting the extra ticks. Like, that's not what it is. You know, so it doesn't deserve to be an S tier unless it's specifically coming off of Xata's Whisper, in my opinion. Obviously, if this was like a ability tier list, Xata's would be at the top, but just void damage without Xata's is not enough. So for me, I put it in upper echelon. Still extremely useful, extremely fun. It'll create a field around enemies that you can use projectile weapons, punch through weapons. They'll orbit the orb and do extra ticks. So it's really solid to use overall. The only way you can actually use this on a frame is with Xata's. That's why there's, like, I guess, a lot of confusion on why the ability works the way it does. But yeah, Xata's does more for void damage than actual void damage does for itself. So I'm going to be having void damage here in the upper echelon category. And now I want to get into the top Cheddar category. Now, first things first, right at the top Cheddar category, the first thing I'm going to put here that's not getting touched is heat. Heat is sitting at the granddaddy. The best status effect in all of Warframe is heat damage. You can take this against any faction in the game and you will get practically the same exact results. It will combine, extra procs will combine with itself to increase single tick damage, so you will not get multiple ticks of, every millisecond you're not seeing 1,000. You're going to see 1,000, you shoot more. You get 10,000, then you get 50,000, then you get 100,000. So as you continuously stack this, it will get stronger and stronger and stronger. You could also use progenitors since it stacks together. So if you're using an ability, you could use a weapon like a primer and throw faction mod on there, status damage mod on there, and heat on there. If you proc heat with that weapon before you proc it with your abilities, and then you continue to proc it with your abilities after, your abilities damage will then be multiplied with the multipliers of the status damage and the Bane mod on top of all of that. So your abilities are going to be doing significantly more damage. That is what is known as a heat inherit. So heat damage, to me, is the best status in all of Warframe. You could use this on any weapon that is capable of proccing it enough times for it to deal damage, and you don't need any other elements to bolster it whatsoever. Just build around it as far as like faction damage, status damage, have enough status to proc it, things like that. Make sure that your heat ticks are actually going to deal sufficient damage, whether that's a large single target weapon or if you're just continuously dealing heat ticks to stack the heat up right after another. But for me, I have never used a status effect in this game, and this also is excluding true damage, because I'm not going to talk about true damage. There's only a couple of instances in the game where it actually comes from, so in my opinion, it's not worth putting on this list. I don't really see a reason to say, Trinity gets it, Sevagoth gets it, a couple other frames get it, but like it's not what we're here for. We're here for the moddable elements, everything we got here, so just want to clear that up. There is no true damage on this list. So yeah, heat, best element in the game. Now, in my opinion, I don't know if this is the second best element in the game, but corrosive is here. I'd say about 75 to 80% of the enemies we go up against in Warframe have armor. Corrosive by itself at 10 stacks will strip upwards of 80% armor. If you run a Tau green, you can strip 95%. If you run 2 regular greens, you can strip up to 100%, so you can full strip with just green shards. And any weapon, any frame that can apply this, it will work on. So it's really, really solid. You could bring corrosive into almost any scenario in the game, and it's going to be beneficial to you in the group. Like I said, 99% of the stuff in the game is going to have armor. Like, it's just like corrosive and tech rot. That's like really the only stuff that doesn't have armor. Everything else in the game is going to have armor. So corrosive is going to be very, very beneficial in most scenarios. It's also very, very solid for like for flat damage builds, obviously, because we're going to be stripping armor, so it's going to increase the flat damage that we're dealing. We don't have to worry about going through the armor or anything with like dot ticks or anything like that, because we're going to be dealing raw damage the entire time. So this is definitely something that I would say use on a lot of your builds. If you're going to be going up against enemies with armor, this really is never a bad option, as long as you're capable of stripping with this. If you're not going to be stripping the armor, then there's not really a big point in using this. Like if you're using a frame that strips, if you're using a Unairu, if you're using like green shards, anything like that, you can go for something else. But if you just wanted your weapon to strip armor really easily and deal a ton of damage, corrosive is your go-to. Now for our last 2 elements that we have here is I'm actually going to put Blast here as our second best element in the game. Blast had a massive glow up after the elemental balance changes. What Blast now does is upon reaching 10 stacks, enemies will explode, dealing 300% of your base damage of your weapon that you cause the explosion of blast procs with. Each blast proc deals 30% base damage up to 300%. So it's very, very strong. When the blast damage explodes, other enemies hit by the blast damage instantly get 10 stacks of blast, and if they explode as well, it will continue and make a sort of chain. That's why you see things like acid shells, which is actually blast damage, being able to spread so well with things like Toxin Lash, because it has innate chain ability, which is really, really nice. So blast damage right here, super powerful. You can even use it for AoE, which is probably the best AoE element in the entire game. You can use it for like very small group clearing. You could probably even use it in some single target scenarios, though I probably wouldn't recommend it. There's definitely, obviously we have things like heat, electric, toxin, slash, gas. Like there's a lot better things you can go for in like a single target scenario than blast. But blast just does so much damage. It's so good. It synergizes with so many abilities in the game, so many weapons in the game, that you just can't ignore it. So I want to put it up here as the second best element in all of Warframe. And now for the final element, we have viral. Now I have viral here. This is going to be 325% final damage on your weapon at 10 stacks. The first stack is going to be 100% right off the rip. So even if you're running something that gives you 1 stack, you're still getting 100% extra damage, which is very, very nice. Yeah, and this only works against health. I want to preface that. So if you're going up against enemies with armor, it will still work. If you're going up against Corpus, once you break their shields, it will begin to work. And it will not work against enemies that have Overguard. So honestly, in that regard, you could say maybe put it down a tier because it won't work against enemies with Overguard and shields. We do have a lot of enemies with Overguard in the game and things like that. But Overguard, you can rip through it pretty fast. We have things like Secondary Fortifier. We can get through it pretty quickly. It's not all that hard to rip through the Overguard. And then you'll just get right back to your viral stacking, do a ton more damage. So this will give you a bunch of extra damage. And it's really, really solid for most builds where you're just looking to get that extra bit of oomph, whether it's from your primer or on the build itself. So overall, this is my tier list build. This is what I think of all the elements we have currently in Warframe. If you guys enjoyed this video, let me know what you guys think down below. Just keep in mind, this is my opinion. This is how I feel about the elements that are currently in Warframe. If you guys feel differently, that's totally fine. This is just my opinion. So, like I said, thank you guys for enjoying the video. Leave a like, leave a comment, please subscribe, and have a nice day.